Don't mess with me, pork chop. What day is this?
It's February 2nd. Groundhog Day.
You know, I thought it was yesterday.
Oh.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. Got my good friend Mark Pellegrini. You'd know him from the writing stream. Today we're going to be talking about some trends in comics and just entertainment. We like to do this every once in a while. How you doing, Mark Pellegrini?
I'm doing good. We like to have fun here.
We do. How's your head feeling?
It was touch and go there with that hangover. I didn't get any sleep last night, and I was like, oh man, if this doesn't start heading in the other direction, I'm gonna have to cancel on West today. But luckily, right around 10:30, it finally lifted, and I was able to think clearly again. So here I am.
And you got to hammer a Gatorade before you go to sleep. That'll help.
That's the thing. Is that the worst thing is? I was just chugging water, and my body was just assuming that everything I was putting into it was poison because it didn't trust me anymore. So it would not process the water, and I couldn't hydrate myself. It was just, I had this sloshing belly where I just could not absorb the water. It was terrible.
That's a rough one. I'm glad you could make it. Just kind of talking about something we've noticed. You look over at Miles Morales Spider-Man. You got the Clone Saga going on. You look over at Avengers. We just finished off Heroes Reborn. We go over into Spider-Man, something I'm enjoying. They're talking about One More Day again. And, you know, they're basically, World War She-Hulk's going on over in Avengers now. And, you know, in DC Comics, guess what? Gotham is being taken over by villains again. It feels like we're seeing the same storylines regurgitated over and over and over. And we've seen this before. You know, we've certainly seen sequels or reimaginings of storylines that have already happened before. And we're seeing it in entertainment as well. You get almost nothing new out of entertainment, specifically anything in the movie theater. It's all a remake, a reboot, a sequel, or a flat out, rip off of something that's already happened. What the hell's going on here, Mark? Are companies, because corporations own all this stuff, their own all these big corporate entities, is there no longer the ability to just make a movie or make a comic book that's just cool?
Obviously, I think there's a lot of factors that go into it, but one of them is the corporates, and most of it stems from the corporate culture and the corporate ideologies, where they're buying up intellectual property and they want it to stay pristine. They don't necessarily want to ruin its marketability, so they end up pulling a Mickey Mouse on it, where they have this character who eventually, Mickey Mouse in his early shorts, he smoked, he drank beer, he flirted with the girls, he got into fights, he used firearms. But then once he became the corporate mascot of the Walt Disney Corporation, he was just pretty much, he's a logo now. And so Mickey lost all of his personality and everything that made him fun and likable. And it really wasn't until around occasionally in the 80s and 90s, they would have some fun with him. Rarely, they do something like Runaway Brain. But it wasn't until the 2000s, like Mickey Mouse Works and House of Mouse and stuff, where they just okay, let's make Mickey fun again. And sometimes you just have to wait for corporations to do that with one of their characters. The problem is that they're buying up other people's characters, or they're inheriting them when they do mergers with other corporations or smaller LLCs that have these IPs. So all of a sudden, the Ninja Turtles, who used to be the flagship characters of indie comics, now they're owned by the Viacom Corporation, and there's a lot of stuff you can't do with Ninja Turtles. A lot of things we'll never see the Turtles doing again.
There used to be blood in Ninja Turtles. Yeah,
right now everything's playing really safe with the brand because it got bought by a corporation, and the corporation wants to maintain its marketability. And Time Warner owns DC, Disney owns Marvel, everything out there, and even the indie books, the quote-unquote indie books, a lot of Image Comics and things like that, the creators are making comics, and they're making good comics too. I'm not going to say they're all bad, but a lot of those publishing houses, the creators there, are doing it with the intent to try and sell that property to a corporation so they can make a movie or a TV show or a Netflix, whatever, streaming series. And so they're making their comic book characters as attractive to corporations and multimedia spin-offs as possible. It's almost
I'll use a word called safe.
Safe, yes. They're almost like they're self-censoring. You could take this character and push them further, but you're not, because you want the character to remain marketable in the eyes of a potential corporate buyer. And so that's happening too. We're seeing creators who are intentionally neutering their storytelling in comics because, you know, the comic isn't what makes you rich anymore. It's the payday for when they make a movie out of your comic. That's what makes you rich, and that's what everybody kind of wants right now. And so they're taking that attitude when they make their comics. And it's coming from both ends. It's coming from the corporations, but it's also coming from the creators, and that's why we're getting so many.
So they're not tailoring the product to the consumer anymore. Their consumer is whatever corporation is going to buy it to produce it on another medium.
They're intentionally keeping everything as safe as possible. And what's safer than, you know, a proven storyline or a proven event that we've seen before and sold in the past? So let's just do it all over again. It's like, how many times can you see Gwen Stacy get thrown off a bridge? You know, how many times we got to see that same scene played out over and over again? How many times we got to see
Bruce Wayne's parents die?
I know, right? But hey, that's the most famous story from those characters' archives. So let's just repeat them ad nauseum over and over again. Because it's safe. And I mean, I'm not talking the same thing about sequels. I mean, even like my favorite events from the 80s and the 90s, they had sequels. Like there's a Secret Wars 2. Infinity Gauntlet had Infinity War and Infinity Crusade. Armor Wars, one of the greatest storylines in Iron Man history. There was an Armor Wars 2 in the 90s, and it actually kind of sucked. I don't like Armor Wars 2. It almost had nothing to do with the original Armor Wars. But that's a thing that they've been doing for a long time. So it's not like doing follow-ups or retreads of classic stories. It's some sort of new phenomenon that we've never seen before. But we're seeing a hell of a lot more of it now than we ever did in the past. And it is just kind of getting tiresome. I know their attitude is like, oh, well, new readers haven't read the classic stories before, so it's new to them. And like, well, one, you're not really getting any new readers in Marvel and DC anymore. It's pretty much old guys like us who still read Marvel and DC comics. Also, kids, yeah, maybe you are getting some kids reading those comics, but it's still not new to them because all those stories were adapted for cartoons and movies in the past. So they've already seen Gwen Stacy get thrown off a bridge.
Better than the original anyway. You're just
no, you really aren't.
And
I mean, yeah.
So we've seen this this cycle, like this reboot cycle for everything. There's this like you reboot it, you start the franchise over again, you run it until it's dead, it goes into like hibernation, and then you reboot it for nostalgia's sake. And in the case of like, I don't know, Independence Day, 25 years, right, before you get the reboot.
Yeah, I forgot that there even was an Independence Day 2. That came out like what, 3 years ago. I'm like, oh,
maybe it was 20 years. Maybe it wasn't 25. Maybe it was 20. But this cycle is getting really contracted. You know, for like Spider-Man, we're already on the third iteration of Spider-Man.
Yeah, in the movies. I know.
It's crazy. And what another thing that we're seeing with this contraction of the reboot cycle is they're also taking these characters that they've purchased. They didn't create these things. They purchased, and they're part of their corporate IP. And they're altering them and they're changing them to update them for the modern audience, to use them as mouthpieces for whatever agenda that they want to get across. And it's turning people off to the characters, and that's also speeding up the cycle of reboot because they end up, well, we still want to make money off of Ghostbusters. We have to reboot it real fast and get it back to what it was originally before we bastardize it again.
You know, it's this weird quantity over quality kind of situation where like, oh, the Amazing Spider-Man, that didn't catch on. Okay, so we're just going to reboot it with an MCU Spider-Man. And what was it was like 3 years between Amazing Spider-Man 2 and then Civil War. I think it was something really short, maybe even less than that between
I think it was less.
Yeah. And I mean, like you mentioned, Ghostbusters Answer the Call, the all-girl one, came out in 2016, absolutely flopped. Ghostbusters Afterlife was supposed to come out in 2020, got delayed by COVID, but that was like a 4-year gap. You know, like they tried the Answer the Call version, didn't catch on, so okay, we'll just go back and make a sequel. And if they're throwing it at the wall. It used to be, though, that you would throw every idea you have at the wall and go with the one that stick. They're throwing the same idea at the wall, and if it doesn't stick, they pick it up and they throw it again. They're just doing it over and over again. And maybe eventually, you throw blindly at a dartboard, eventually you're going to hit a bullseye. It feels like that's what they're trying to do. Maybe by accident they will produce a good Ghostbusters movie or a good Turtles movie or a good something, a good Batman movie or whatever.
We haven't had a good Turtles movie since what? Well, in the theaters since TMNT or Turtles 2.
Yeah, it's I have a soft spot for the 2007 CGI movie, but if we're just talking like live action movies, yeah, we haven't seen a good one since Secret of the Ooze, which was.
Listen, I remember the rumors that was going to be based off the Mirage series, and that 2007 one was a disappointment because it was.
Yeah, I mean that. We could have a whole video on that in and of itself. But yeah, Peter Laird produced that one, and he tried to make it as authentic to what the Turtles were at the time, and people misinterpreted that as being a Mirage Turtles movie, but what he really meant was more like the cartoon that he was producing at the time, the 2003 cartoon. But yeah, it was a case though like Turtles though. I mean, we still get some good Turtle stuff here and then. I actually really liked the Batman TMNT animated film. It was direct to DVD, but it was still actually pretty good. I enjoyed it.
Pretty good too.
And the first and third volume of the comic were really good. And there was that TMNT Power Rangers crossover that Boom Studios did that I thought was excellent. And there's a sequel coming out. I think.
Do you remember why the second volume of TMNT Batman sucked so bad?
They added a.
They retold the same story from the first one.
They just reversed it. Yeah. Yeah, it was also that they hired
the same shit.
I know, and it was more nostalgia pandering because they recreated like the intro of the 80s cartoon like in the panels of the comic, and it was like, all right, well that's 2 pages of this comic that you just wasted, on like nostalgia bait. But yeah, it's the same stuff over and over again, and yeah, you get bored with it. But I bet they've been saying that about comics though since the 80s and the 70s. Like, how many times can we see Batman fight the Joker? How many times can we see Batman fight Two-Face over and over again? By the nature of these comics that are ongoing eternal narratives that can never have closure, yeah, you're going to see Batman fight the Joker 100,000 times and it's never going to stop. But I think it's more the audacity nowadays of like beat for beat redoing things. When Frank Miller retold Batman's origin, in Batman Year One, it wasn't a beat-for-beat version of the previous origin. He added so much to it. He retold it from a completely different perspective. He did make fundamental changes to characters like Gordon and Catwoman. And he brought in aspects like Gordon's family life, his dysfunctional family life with his wife and his infant son. Like all that stuff, wholesale, brand new ideas that he brought to it. Catwoman, it didn't stick, but he tried to make her a prostitute, and that didn't last. That's because it's Frank Miller, and everybody's got to be a prostitute. But he tried something new, and that's a case of something not sticking, but still trying it. He was still trying new things to retell the origin. But nowadays, it's like, okay, well, Frank Miller, you retold the origin of Batman with Batman Year One. So anytime we see Batman's origin now, it's just Batman Year One. Even Zero Year, which I kind of just, I appreciate that it brought some new ideas into it. I don't think that they were good ideas. They're kind of like prostitute Catwoman tier. like, okay, none of this stuff needs to stick. I do appreciate that Snyder did try something new with the Year One origin. But because he's Snyder, he had to make it 12 issues long, and it just got so boring.
Probably, yeah. This is destined from the beginning of time kind of crap. Mm-hmm. But it's crazy. You look at DC's comic book line, like 40% of it's Batman now.
It is. It reminds me of I think it was the mid 2000s when Wolverine was in every single X book and the Avengers. It was like, okay, Wolverine's our most marketable character, so we're just gonna put him in everything. And it's like, how much free time does Wolverine have to be on the X-Men, to be an X-Factor, to be an X-Force, to be on the new Avengers, and to have his own solo title? And also he's over in Uncanny X-Men and Extreme X-Men and all these other ones. How much Wolverine do we really need? And eventually that he got supplanted with Deadpool, and it felt like there were like 10 Deadpool books on the stands each month. Like it just wouldn't stop. And yeah, Batman's doing that now.
What do you think's going to happen with Deadpool in the MCU? Do you think they're going to do any of the stuff that was happening before that people actually liked? No, it's going to be some bullshit Disney version, and it's going to suck ass. And he's essentially going to be Iron Man, but burnt up.
Right. So here's the thing: is that I really appreciate the 2 Ryan Reynolds movies we got. I don't own them; they're not my favorites, but we're never going to get Deadpool movies like that ever again. Those hard rated R Deadpool movies that are exactly what the fans wanted, and a lot of that was because Ryan Reynolds fought for that. He fought for the R-rated Deadpool. He produced that pitch pilot that got ignored by Fox until it wound up online. Somebody quote unquote leaked it, and then there's a huge fan reaction. You very rarely find people, one, willing to fight for the authenticity of a character in an adaptation, and two, having enough sway in Hollywood to actually influence those decisions. Ryan Reynolds managed to do that. We're not going to get that, you know. Even if we get Reynolds back as Deadpool, I'm honestly not sure if we do. It's going to be a sanitized version. But the MCU, as like you said, it's been the same thing over and over again. When I was watching Thor Ragnarok and it just felt like a clone of Guardians of the Galaxy. When I watched Doctor Strange and it was just a beat-for-beat remake of Iron Man, but just changing all the proper nouns from Tony Stark to Doctor Strange, I was like, okay, they're really running on autopilot now, and they really are doing the same thing ad nauseum. They're not trying new ideas. They found a safe, comfy spot. And so everything now is a different flavor of Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, oh, it's Thor flavored Guardians of the Galaxy. Oh, now it's Avengers flavored Guardians of the Galaxy. It's just the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, if it's in movies, if it's not Christopher Nolan and it's not Quentin Tarantino, you're not getting anything new and no new ideas. You're going to get a Tetris movie before you get a goddamn new idea in a movie, unless it's Christopher Nolan.
And that's the thing, too, that I've been seeing all the reactions to Space Jam 2, Space Jam: A New Legacy, and it's just Ralph Breaks the Internet, but with Time Warner characters instead of Walt Disney characters. And even that was just Ready Player One, which was all the corporate characters. And I was watching all of these clips of Space Jam 2 on that people are posting on Twitter, and I was like, do they play basketball in this game, or do they just go to Rick and Morty land and Mad Max Fury Road land and Austin Powers land? Like, sometimes they aren't even jokes. It's just they took clips from Austin Powers and replaced Mini-Me with Elmer Fudd and the hairless cat with Sylvester. And it's like, hey, do you remember Austin Powers? That's the joke. That's not a joke, but it's just the movie is just a big string of that. It's just the Time Warner Corporation saying,
it's like
"Hey,
a big
we own
ad
this and
for
this."
the stuff they've already made.
Yeah, right. I mean, Ralph Breaks the Internet was just a big ad for Disney Plus. You know,
but
it's like, hey, we own this, and this.
Fun.
Yeah, that's the thing though, is that Ready Player One. I've heard people say that that's quote unquote the last movie, because it seems like ever since Ready Player One came out, that's what corporations have been giving us, is just like, hey, remember Thundercats? Hey, remember Indiana Jones? Hey, remember Back to the Future? Hey, remember Ghostbusters? And like, okay, hey, how about a new idea? Like, new ideas don't sell. Like, we know that you'll go watch Back to the Future 4 just because it's Back to the Future 4, so that's what you're getting. Ugh.
Yeah, we're just getting all of the old stuff ad nauseum, lesser versions of them, because it's watered down corporate bullshit versions. Not that they weren't part of corporations before, but these things, they're not just movie production studios anymore. They're all owned by these enormous stupid entities, and no one can take a risk. Everything is just formulaic. Yeah,
I mean, you mentioned Christopher Nolan and Quentin Tarantino as being like the exception to the rule now, because they're their own brand. I mean, when you go to see a Quentin Tarantino movie, it's because you want to see a Quentin Tarantino movie. The plot and the title and the content is incidental. Quentin
and
Tarantino
even all his
is a brand.
Movies are derivative of stuff he liked as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, there's a flavor to his movies, but that's the thing, is that creators have that, and it feels like there's a lot less of that now than there used to be. I mean, you would go to see a John Carpenter movie in the 80s because you wanted to see a John Carpenter movie. His movies were all so good. You would go see a Steven Spielberg movie. You'd go see a George Lucas movie. You'd go see a movie based on the creative talents behind it, because they were a proven track record, and they were almost always original IPs. I mean, before Tim Burton started doing nothing but adaptations and stuff. I mean, you went to see Edward Scissorhands, not because that wasn't Batman, that wasn't Willy Wonka, that was an original property, but you went to go see it because it was Tim Burton. Same thing with Nightmare Before Christmas, right? You would go see it because of the creative person behind it. And we've lost that. Now people go see Ghostbusters Afterlife because of the IP attached to it. Maybe some people know that Jason Reitman's the director. Maybe some people don't. Most people probably don't care. They're going because it has Ghostbusters in the title. They're going to go see Space Jam 2. Like, who's even the director of that movie? I don't know. I don't care. They're going because they recognize the intellectual property behind it. They're not going because of the creative individuals who create the content of that movie. The content doesn't really matter.
Even Pixar, like the most creative studio out there, that was only doing original stuff.
Now they're doing Cars 5 and Toy Story 4 and Monsters University 3 and stuff.
Yeah, it's disappointing, man. It's not comics, you know. It's not just comics. It's not just movies. Obviously, that's all you get in video games. You don't get a lot of original stuff anymore. It's, you know, we're on Final Fantasy 49 now.
But, I mean, I'll give video games some slack, though, is that they always have to change to fit whatever the new console technology is. But I also feel like we've had diminishing returns in that. There just doesn't seem like that big of a difference to me between the PlayStation 2 or 3 and the PlayStation 4 or 5 or whatever they're on now. Like the leap from, you know, the original Nintendo to the original Super Nintendo felt like, you know, a huge leap. And then from that to the N64 completely changed how the games were made. You know, they added a Z-axis to your game. But now we don't really have that anymore. The technology is kind of too advanced where it doesn't really impact or change our gameplay. I think a really good game that comes out now deserves recognition because it means that the developers are really thinking outside the box, but not as much of that as there used to be.
Not at all. Mark, thank you so much for joining me, talking about some of the stagnation as far as creativity across the entertainment industry. Obviously, we're suffering through it in comics, entertainment, you know, TV and everything. You have anything else left to say?
Nah, I mean, just it's all so tiresome.